The unforgiving deserts of Arizona Territory witnessed countless betrayals during the 1880s, but none would carry consequences as devastating as the deception practiced by Thomas Whitmore in the autumn of 1884, when his younger brother committed an unthinkable crime against the Apache people. Thomas made a fateful decision to protect family over truth, weaving an elaborate lie before Chief Cochillo that would temporarily save his brother from justice. What Thomas failed to understand was that the Apache possessed methods of uncovering deception that no white man's cunning could overcome. Chapter 1. Blood on Sacred Ground. The Arizona Territory summer of 1884 baked the desert landscape with merciless intensity that transformed the Red Rock Canyons into furnaces capable of killing unprepared travelers within hours. Thomas Whitmore had learned to respect this harsh environment during his 8 years operating a trading post along the boundary between Apache territory and settler lands, building a reputation for fairness that made him one of the few white men trusted by both communities. At 35, his weathered face and careful demeanor reflected the wisdom of someone who understood that survival in this unforgiving region required more than physical endurance. It demanded respect for the complex web of cultural relationships that governed every interaction between peoples whose histories were stained with mutual bloodshed. Thomas's younger brother James had arrived from Missouri 6 months earlier, bringing attitudes shaped by newspaper accounts that portrayed Native Americans as savage obstacles to civilization's inevitable progress. At 28, James possessed the reckless confidence of someone who had never faced genuine consequences for poor decisions, his drinking habits and loud opinions making him unwelcome in the careful social balance that Thomas had spent years cultivating. The trading post owner had tried repeatedly to educate his brother about Apache customs and the sacred nature of certain territorial landmarks, but James dismissed such concerns as superstitious nonsense unworthy of a modern man's attention. The crisis erupted on a scorching August afternoon when Thomas discovered his brother's camp in complete disarray, with James and 2 drifter accomplices frantically loading pack mules with objects that made Thomas's blood run cold. Sacred Apache artifacts, ceremonial masks, ancient pottery, and jewelry that had rested undisturbed in tribal burial sites for generations lay scattered across the ground like common merchandise, awaiting transport to distant markets, where such items commanded prices that corrupted men's judgment. The distinctive red clay that clung to the stolen objects identified their origin as coming from the Canyon of Ancestors, a sacred site that Apache law protected with supernatural sanctions that no tribe member would dare violate. James's confession emerged through alcohol-loosened lips that revealed details far worse than simple grave robbery. The trio had been discovered during their desecration by Swift Elk, a young Apache warrior who had been hunting in the canyon's upper reaches. Rather than fleeing and abandoning their plunder, James had shot the young man during a panicked confrontation that left the warrior bleeding among the violated graves of his ancestors. The accomplices had fled immediately after the killing, taking their shares of stolen artifacts and disappearing into the vast territorial wilderness that swallowed men who wished to vanish from civilized accountability. Thomas understood immediately that his brother had committed an offense that transcended ordinary crime in Apache perception. The desecration of burial grounds violated spiritual laws that governed the relationship between the living and the dead, while Swift Elk's murder on sacred ground compounded the sacrilege in ways that demanded blood justice according to tribal custom. Chief Cochillo would not permit such violations to pass unanswered, regardless of the political complications that punishing a white man might create with territorial authorities. Within 2 days, Apache runners arrived at every trading post and ranch within 50 miles, delivering Chief Cochillo's summons that all white traders present themselves at the tribal council grounds. The murdered warrior's body had been discovered, and the violated burial sites bore evidence of recent disturbance that could not be explained by natural causes or animal activity. The chief's message carried unmistakable weight. Someone would answer for crimes that threatened the spiritual foundation of Apache society, and every white man in the region fell under suspicion until the guilty parties were identified and delivered to tribal justice. Thomas faced an impossible decision as his terrified brother begged for protection that would require betraying every principle of honesty that had made his trading business successful. Family loyalty demanded he shield James from consequences that would certainly prove fatal, while honor insisted that truth serve justice regardless of personal cost. The choice he made in those desperate hours would set in motion events that would destroy everything he had built and reveal that some debts could never be fully repaid once incurred. Chapter 2. Deception's Dangerous Gamble. The council grounds occupied a natural amphitheater carved by ancient waters into the red sandstone cliffs, creating acoustics that amplified every spoken word while providing shade from the relentless Arizona sun. Thomas arrived at dawn, as instructed, joining 5 other white traders who had been summoned to answer Chief Cochillo's inquiry into the desecration that had violated sacred ground and claimed the life of a promising young warrior. The assembled Apache warriors numbered over 40, their silent presence creating an atmosphere of barely contained fury that made the morning air feel thick with the promise of violence should the wrong words be spoken. Chief Cochillo sat upon a natural stone platform that elevated him above the gathered assembly, his 70 years of leadership evident in the commanding presence that required no theatrical gestures to establish authority. Silver hair fell past his shoulders, framing a face carved by decades of impossible decisions that had preserved his people through wars and treaties that had decimated other tribes. Behind him stood Nate, the medicine man whose reputation for perceiving hidden truths made him feared even among tribal members who had nothing to conceal. The shaman's dark eyes swept across the assembled white traders with an intensity that seemed to penetrate beyond visible surfaces into the shadowed territories where guilt resided. The chief's opening words carried the weight of absolute authority as he described the crimes that had brought them together. Swift Elk's body had been found among violated graves that had been systematically looted of items whose spiritual significance transcended any monetary value that ignorant thieves might assign them. The young warrior had been shot while defending sacred ground, his death wounds indicating cowardice that compounded the dishonor of grave desecration. Apache law demanded that those responsible face justice that would restore spiritual balance disrupted by such profound violations. Thomas felt his heart hammering against his ribs as each trader was questioned individually about their movements during the relevant time frame. His mind raced through the fabricated story he had constructed during sleepless nights, a narrative that would redirect suspicion away from James while providing enough plausible detail to satisfy Apache's investigation methods. The lie required careful calibration, too vague, and it would invite deeper scrutiny. Too specific and contradictions might emerge that would expose the deception. When Chief Cochillo's penetrating gaze finally settled on Thomas, the trader forced himself to maintain the steady eye contact that Apache culture interpreted as evidence of truthfulness. His voice remained calm as he wove the elaborate deception, describing a group of 3 drifters who had passed through his trading post 5 days before the murder. These fictional criminals had asked suspicious questions about the location of ancient sites, their rough appearance, and careless talk, marking them as the type of lawless men who respected neither white law nor tribal custom. Thomas claimed he had warned them away from Apache territory, but they had departed southward toward the Mexican border, where countless fugitives disappeared into lawless regions beyond effective pursuit. The fabricated details emerged with practiced smoothness as Thomas described distinctive features he claimed to remember. A tall man with a scarred face, another with a distinctive limp, a third who wore an unusual silver belt buckle. These invented characteristics provided enough specificity to seem credible, while remaining impossible to verify or disprove through investigation. He even suggested that the drifters had mentioned plans to sell artifacts in Mexican markets where questions about provenance were seldom asked. Chief Cochillo listened without interruption, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts regarding this convenient explanation. The other traders nodded supportively, relieved that suspicions seemed to be shifting away from the established white community toward anonymous criminals who had supposedly vanished beyond territorial boundaries. Thomas felt a surge of desperate hope that his deception might actually succeed in protecting James while satisfying Apache's demands for identifying the guilty parties. However, nature's reaction sent ice through Thomas's veins despite the desert heat. The medicine man's eyes had narrowed during the testimony, his expression suggesting that spiritual senses had detected something troubling beneath the surface of smooth words. The shaman whispered briefly to Chief Cochillo, gesturing in patterns that carried meaning within tribal communication systems that white men rarely understood completely. The chief dismissed the assembly without announcing conclusions, stating that the council would meditate on the information provided before determining appropriate action. Thomas departed with the other traders, believing he had successfully navigated the dangerous confrontation while unaware that his carefully constructed lies had already begun unraveling under scrutiny that operated according to principles his culture had never taught him to anticipate. Chapter 3. When Shadows Speak. 3 weeks of tormented sleep followed Thomas's testimony before the Apache Council, his nights plagued by visions of Swift Elk's final moments and the violated graves that his brother's greed had desecrated. The trading post's daily routines continued with mechanical precision, but Thomas found himself unable to meet the eyes of Apache customers who came to purchase supplies, their presence a constant reminder of the lie that grew heavier with each passing day. He had received word that James had successfully reached California, establishing himself in San Francisco, where distance and anonymity provided protection from territorial consequences. What Thomas failed to understand was that Nate had begun sacred ceremonies immediately after the council meeting, conducting rituals that called upon spiritual forces to reveal truths that human investigation alone could never uncover. The medicine man entered trance states that lasted for days, his consciousness traveling along pathways invisible to ordinary perception while seeking guidance from ancestors whose wisdom transcended the limitations of physical evidence. The visions that emerged during these ceremonies painted scenes of deception that identified Thomas's testimony as an elaborate fabrication designed to shield someone whose guilt demanded acknowledgement. Simultaneously, Apache scouts conducted methodical investigations that approached the crime with patience that white lawmen rarely exercised. They returned repeatedly to the Canyon of Ancestors, examining every disturbed stone and displaced earth with attention to detail that reconstructed events with surprising accuracy. The boot prints found near the violated graves matched patterns distinctive to footwear sold exclusively at Thomas's trading post, a detail that contradicted his story about drifters passing through without making purchases. More damning evidence emerged when scouts discovered a knife wedged between rocks near Swift Elk's body, its handle carved with initials that careful examination revealed as belonging to James Whitmore. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source when Mourning Dove, an Apache woman who gathered medicinal plants in the canyon's upper reaches, came forward with testimony she had initially withheld from fear of white retribution. She had witnessed a man fleeing the burial grounds on the day of Swift Elk's murder, his features clearly visible in the bright afternoon sunlight. Her detailed description matched James Whitmore perfectly, including distinctive characteristics like the scar on his left forearm and his unusual gait resulting from a childhood injury. Mourning Dove's courage in speaking the truth provided the final piece of evidence that shattered Thomas's carefully constructed deception. Chief Cochillo summoned Thomas alone to a private meeting that carried none of the formal ceremony of the earlier council gathering. The chief's weathered face reflected profound disappointment as he laid out the accumulated evidence that proved beyond question that James had committed the crimes while Thomas had deliberately lied to protect his brother. The knife bearing James's initials rested between them like an accusation that required no verbal amplification, while Mourning Dove's testimony eliminated any possibility of claiming mistaken identity or circumstantial coincidence. Thomas's world collapsed as he realized the Apache had known the truth for weeks, allowing him to believe his deception had succeeded while methodically gathering irrefutable proof of his dishonor. Chief Cochillo's words cut deeper than any physical punishment as he explained that Thomas's betrayal wounded more severely than his brother's crime. James had acted from ignorance and greed, predictable failings among men who understood nothing of sacred law. However, Thomas had known better. His years among the Apache had provided a full understanding of the gravity of his lies. He had chosen to place family loyalty above truth and honor, corrupting the trust that had made peaceful coexistence possible between their peoples. Now, Apache law demanded payment for both the original crime and the subsequent deception that had compounded the offense. Chapter 4: Payment in Blood. Chief Cochillo's explanation of Apache justice unfolded with the terrible clarity of natural law that recognized no appeals to sentiment or circumstance. Since James had fled beyond tribal reach, responsibility for his crimes transferred to the family member who had actively aided his escape through deliberate deception. Thomas must now face consequences designed not for vengeance, but for restoring the spiritual balance that his brother's violence and his own dishonesty had shattered. The chief offered one alternative: reveal James's exact location in California so that Apache warriors could travel west to claim justice directly from the guilty party. Thomas felt the weight of an impossible choice crushing down upon him as he contemplated betraying his brother's location versus accepting punishment for crimes he had not personally committed. Despite everything James had done, despite the murders and desecration and the callous disregard for consequences that had destroyed Thomas's carefully built life, the bonds of brotherhood retained power that transcended rational calculation. He could not speak the words that would send Apache warriors to California, could not become the instrument of his own brother's death, regardless of how richly James deserved whatever fate awaited him. The phrase blood payment carried meanings in Apache culture that differed significantly from the immediate execution that white justice often demanded for capital crimes. Chief Cochillo explained that Thomas would surrender everything he possessed to Swift Elk's grieving family: his trading post, livestock, saved money, and all material goods accumulated during 8 years of frontier commerce. More devastating than financial ruin was the sentence of 5 years living among the Apache people, separated completely from white society while learning tribal ways as the lowest member of the community. The ceremony that formalized Thomas's punishment occurred at dawn 3 days later, with the entire tribe assembled to witness justice being administered according to laws older than European presence in the Americas. Nate marked Thomas's forehead with permanent tattoos that identified him as one who had violated sacred trust, symbols that would follow him throughout his remaining years as a visible reminder of dishonor that could never be completely erased. The medicine man's chants invoked spiritual forces to accept this payment as sufficient recompense for crimes that had threatened cosmic balance. Thomas's transformation from respected trader to tribal servant stripped away every element of identity he had constructed during his adult years. He moved into a simple dwelling on the community's outskirts, performing menial labor that tested physical endurance while serving as a constant reminder of his reduced status. Learning Apache language and customs from the position of someone who had forfeited all claims to respect proved far more difficult than his earlier cultural education had been. The weight of communal judgment pressed down during every interaction, making clear that forgiveness would emerge only through years of demonstrated humility and service. Swift Elk's family received Thomas's trading post and transformed it into a successful enterprise that provided income supporting the murdered warrior's widow and young children. The bitter irony of watching others prosper from his life's work while he hauled water and tended fires created emotional torment that exceeded any physical hardship the desert climate imposed. Word of Thomas's fate eventually reached James in California, carried by travelers who spread tales of the dramatic justice that had reshaped Arizona territorial relationships. The younger brother's response revealed the selfishness that had characterized his entire life. Rather than returning to face consequences or attempting to negotiate his brother's release, James simply disappeared deeper into California's anonymous cities, abandoning Thomas to suffer alone for crimes he had committed. The years of servitude gradually taught Thomas painful wisdom about the true cost of misplaced loyalty and the devastating consequences of choosing family bonds over moral principles. His sacrifice purchased nothing of value, saving a brother who proved unworthy of protection while destroying the honorable life that genuine integrity had built. The Apache people eventually accepted Thomas back in a limited good standing, respecting the completeness with which he had paid his debt, but the scars, both visible and invisible, remained as permanent testimony to choices that could never be unmade. His story became a cautionary tale whispered around frontier campfires, proving that some debts demand payment in currencies that bankrupt the soul itself, leaving behind only the hollow shell of what a man once was before deception corrupted everything he claimed to value. This devastating tale of loyalty and betrayal reveals how one lie can destroy everything a man builds across a lifetime. If Thomas's tragic story moved you, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible frontier tales where justice demanded prices that few men could afford to pay. Would you have protected your brother or told the truth? Share your thoughts below.